All right, guys, here we are for another lesson today. I talked with my own class today on Zoom, and it was so good to be able to see some of your faces and hear things that are going on in your lives. And if you guys have questions about a certain assignment or a topic, please feel free to email, and I can try to help at least my class during those Zoom meetings. And maybe if you're not in Mrs. Bunker's class, you can have your teachers help you during your Zoom meetings as well. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started with today's lesson. We're still learning about colonial America, and today's topic is life on the farm in the Middle Colonies. Now, if you remember, the Middle Colonies are known for, they were known in those in the colonial days as the area to grow crops, whereas the New England colonies, which were up north, were more known for fishing because their weather conditions didn't really suit growing crops. All right, let's go ahead and get started on a few spelling words today, or sorry, not spelling, but vocabulary words today. Now, these vocabulary words are words you probably have heard. These ones are a lot more familiar today than some of the ones that we've had. Rye is a grain that looks like wheat and is used to make bread. Now, if you may have never seen rye itself as a grain, but I bet you've heard of rye bread. If you go to a restaurant and order a breakfast, sometimes they give you the choice of a different kind of bread, and rye is one of those kinds of bread. Now, barley is also a grain that is used for making food. Barley looks a lot like oatmeal, and it's oftentimes used in like a beef and barley stew, and it tastes a lot like oatmeal too, in my opinion. Occasion, an event or celebration. Now, we have lots of occasions that we celebrate every year. Our birthdays are a good example of an occasion that we oftentimes will have a celebration for. Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, some of the big holidays we have a big celebration for as well. Excuse me. Advice, a suggestion about what someone should do. Now, being kids, you receive lots of advice from people who are older than you. Maybe your mom and dad, maybe your teacher, maybe your big brother or sister. Everyone seems to have an opinion about what you should do, and that's called advice. Sometimes advice is bad, but most of the time when people give you advice, it's usually good. Custom. Now, a custom is a tradition. We have customs every year. For example, Christmas is famous for having customs or traditions. It's some of our customs and traditions is hanging up a stocking. Or we might have a special tradition that we do with our family on Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day. It's something, a tradition is something we do year after year or for that same event. Something that we repeat because we enjoy it and like to do that. A mill is a building with machines that grind grain into flour. So maybe you guys can think of a place in Utah County up in Lehigh called the Lehigh Roller Mills. They used to, and I don't know if they're still even opened at this point, but they would grind flour, and they're famous for cookie mixes and flour and whatnot. But a mill is a place where they grind grain into flour. Obediently, behaving in a way that follows what you have been told to do. Now, as a teacher, I hope that my students will behave obediently. That means I'm hoping that they're going to follow directions that I've asked them to do. Being obedient to your parents would be following directions from them obediently. So I'm sure that that's a pretty familiar word for you. All right, let's go ahead and get going on the story. You can follow along with me as I read it to you today. And then remember, at the end, we're going to be doing a worksheet that we have to know the main idea and some supporting details about the story. So as we're reading, I want you to be focused on what is the whole story about, and then what are some of the details that happen in the story that support that main idea. We'll be doing that for this story, and then you're going to have a chance to do the very same thing on your own, the story that you're supposed to read, and you'll be completing that one by yourself. So let's go ahead and begin. Chapter 17, Life on a Farm in the Middle Atlantic Colonies, Part 1. Primrose comes to see the kittens that have just been born yelled Patient, Primrose's sister. See, there are 6 of them, Patience continued as her sister appeared at her side. Primrose sat down next to Patience as she pointed to a spot beneath a large shrub where the mother cat and her kittens lay. The 2 girls stared long and hard at the tiny creatures that looked more like little rats than kittens. There were 6 kittens in all. Their eyes were closed and they could not walk. They lay in a heap together besides their mother. I want to keep one as my own, said Patience. Well, you can't yet, Primrose replied. They have to stay with their mother for at least 10 or 11 weeks. Then you'll have to ask Mama and Papa. They'll say no though. They don't like us keeping animals inside the house. I'll hide it in a safe place, said Patience firmly. Where? Asked Primrose quite seriously. Where will you hide it? I can't think of one place that Mama and Papa wouldn't find it. In a bucket, announced Patience confidently. Do you think that a kitten will stay in a bucket all day waiting for you to finish your chores? Laughed Primrose. Do you think Mama and Papa won't notice you carrying a bucket around everywhere? Patience thought about this for a while before she replied. Then she said, the kitten will stay in the bucket if I train her to. Patience chose to ignore the second part of Primrose's question. The 2 girls continued to debate about whether or not it was possible to hide a kitten in their small log house without anyone noticing. Like many colonial cabins, theirs consisted of 2 small rooms downstairs and 3 very small bedrooms upstairs. Primrose and Patience shared a bedroom, as did their 3 brothers. Here's a picture of Primrose trying to talk Patience out of her idea to keep a kitten for herself. Primrose and Patience lived on a farm in southern New Jersey. They and the rest of their family were originally from Sweden. They had moved to this English colony because of their Uncle Sven. He had written to their father and told him about the wonderful life they could have there. Uncle Sven had traveled to New Jersey from Sweden in 1699. That was exactly 30 years after the English had taken control of this region from the Dutch. Uncle Sven was now a successful wheat farmer. The girls and their family had arrived in New Jersey in 1701. Primrose and Patience lived with their father, mother, and 3 brothers on a 100-acre farm. On their farm, they grew wheat, rye, and barley. They kept cows, pigs, and chickens too. Most people in the Middle Atlantic colonies lived on small farms that ranged from 50 acres to 150 acres. These farms were quite spread apart, and neighbors didn't see much of each other except at church on Sunday. Sometimes they got together for special occasions or if someone needed help. Here's Patience and her family doing chores. The farm that the girls lived on had a house and a large barn. They had a garden where they grew vegetables, berries, and fruits. They had a small orchard too. Their garden was fenced, as was the area where they kept their pigs. The cows were sent out to graze in the pasture each morning and brought back into the barn each night for milking. Their farm animals were valuable and they kept a close eye on them. After a while, the girls' older brother, Lars, found them by the shrub. Lars had been sent to look for them by their father. He sat down beside the girls and peeked at the kittens. Finally, he spoke. You 2 are needed in the barn. Papa wants you to lead the cows out into the pasture. Then Mama wants you to weed and water the garden. After that, she wants you to go inside and help her with the new quilt she is making. Here's a picture of Lars, their brother, finding the kittens. Primrose and Patience sighed. They knew they had several hours of chores ahead of them. Next week would be even busier. It was spring cleaning week. They would have to help Mama make soap before they cleaned and swept out the whole house. Before scampering off, Patience knelt down and kissed the small pile of newborn kittens. I'll be back later, she whispered. Now, do you guys think Patience could really keep her kitten in a bucket? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. I did the first page for you. Now, this is 13.1. If you look in your packet, it is actually double-sided, 13.1. There's a part 1 at the top, and then the next page you'll see is a part 2. We just barely read Life on a Farm in the Middle of the Atlantic Colonies, part 1. In a minute, you'll be reading part 2 by yourself and completing an organizer that looks just like this. So here's what I did. I came up with my main idea for part 1. I basically wanted to take the big idea. I didn't want a lot of small details in the main idea. I didn't want a lot of details in the main idea, okay? Then, if you go down, I have supporting details. That's where the specific details are going to go. Now, you'll notice you have 3 columns of supporting details that you're going to write. Now, you kind of want to keep them grouped into sections. So, for example, this first supporting details are all about the kittens. Primrose and Patience found newborn kittens. Patience wanted to keep one for herself. Primrose said they were too young and they weren't allowed to keep animals in the house. Patience said that she would keep the kitten in a bucket. So this first section really relates to one bigger idea, kittens. And then the middle section talks mostly about their new home. Their cabin had 2 small rooms downstairs and 3 small rooms upstairs. Primrose and Patience share a room. They lived in southern New Jersey, but were originally from Sweden. Their Uncle Sven convinced them to move there because he had said they would have a wonderful life. They lived with their father, mother, and 3 brothers. So this basically talks about why they came to New Jersey, about what they lived in, their house, who they lived with, and so forth. So this talks mostly about their new home. And the last column is more details about specifically about their farm. So the farm was 100 acres. They grew wheat, rye, and barley. They kept cows, pigs, and chickens. They lived far from their neighbors, but saw them at church and special occasions. Now with farms were usually bigger pieces of land, so people were spread out a little bit. They grew vegetables, berries, and fruits in their garden, and they had a small orchard. So when you're doing your next one on the story that you're about to read, I would like you to think about this. The main idea is the big, just one sentence only about what the whole chapter is about. Not a lot of detail in this first part. That's where you're going to add it here. And then try to find maybe 3 bigger or 3 smaller ideas with details that support this main idea. So I found a section that talked mostly about kittens. Then I found a section, and then I wrote details mostly about their home, and then I wrote details mostly about their farm here. So these support the main idea. All of the details we listed are kind of categorized into 3 separate groups, but each of these ideas support that Primrose and Patience lived on a very large farm in New Jersey. Now, if you're watching the video while you're doing yours, you can rewind back to look at mine as you do your own. But you're not doing it on the story we just read. You'll be doing it on the part 2 story you're about to read next, chapter, I think it's chapter 18. Let's move on. It is chapter 18. So you're going to read chapter 18 independently. That means by yourself. And then you're going to complete the second side of worksheet 13.1 using chapter 18. And remember, you're looking for a big main idea and then supporting ideas to go with it. Chapter 18, Life on a Farm in the Middle Atlantic Colonies, Part 2. Go ahead and pause as you read, and then at the end, you'll complete the back side of 13.1. Okay, this is the second side of 13.1, part 1 that I did for you. You need to now complete this part 2 using chapter 18, Life on a Farm in the Middle Atlantic Colonies, part 2. Now remember, you need to write one big idea the whole chapter is about, and then maybe chunk what you read into 3 sections and put the details for each of those sections in each separate column. Go ahead and do that. If you need to pause or rewind to look back at my example, you may do so. Okay, we have one little grammar practice to do today. This is actually just a review of what you've already done. But before I flip to that next page, I want to review with you parts of speech. What is a noun, what is a verb, and what is an adjective? Okay, a noun names a person, place, or thing. Now, I always remember it's usually something I can touch. However, it can also be an idea. So for example, time. You can't always touch time, but time would be a noun. Verb. It is an action. Either you can act it out or it's a state of being, like is, am, are, was, and were. And lastly, adjectives describe or give details about the noun. So for example, Mrs. Bunker has brown hair. Brown would describe my hair on my head. Brown would be considered an adjective. Colors and numbers are usually adjectives, plus other words that describe nouns as well. Okay, you're gonna go ahead and complete 13.2. I did the first 2 for you. Remember, as you go, to cross out the words in your word bank after you've used them so that you don't have to accidentally use them twice or get confused by them. Now, what it says to do is read each sentence, decide which word from the box replaced the underlined words, and write it on the line. Write the part of speech for that word as well. So you have to tell me, is it a noun, an adjective, or a verb after you've determined which word it is. So number 1, I thought the test we had at the middle of the term was easy because I studied for it. What word would go here out of our word bank? Oh, middle of term, I know that's midterm. Now midterm is a point in time. Time is a noun. Therefore, I would put my part of speech as a noun. The having too much power or energy engine caused the toy plane to fly high enough to get stuck in a very tall tree. What word could take the place of having too much power or energy? Oh, overpowered. So I put overpowered here. Now, overpowered is actually a detail or a describing word that is describing the word engine. Because it's describing a noun, engine is a noun, something I can touch, it's a thing, I know it must be an adjective. So I wrote the part of speech as an adjective. So go ahead and complete 3 and 4 on this side, and then finish the rest of them 5 through 10 on the back. And that's all for today. I sure hope that you work hard. If you have any questions, please have your moms email me, and they can also help you with this if there's a tricky one that you come across and you're not sure what to do. Have a good day, and we will see you again tomorrow.